The night began with something so ordinary it almost begged to be ignored. An empty diner on the outskirts of Santa Fe, its neon sign flickering like it hadn't worked properly since the Carter administration. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee clung to the walls, and a tired waitress moved between tables with a notepad tucked into her apron. Her name was Jenna Riley, 27 years old, with calloused hands and eyes that carried more weight than her paycheck ever would. To most customers, she was invisible, just another server in a uniform that never quite fit. But that night, something happened that turned the most forgettable shift of her life into the story that would define it. A man stumbled through the door, map in hand, panic etched across his face. He muttered frantically in Spanish, pointing first at the paper, then toward the road outside. Jenna froze for half a second. She hadn't spoken Spanish since her grandmother passed, and her words came out clumsy, broken, but warm. She slowed her voice, mimed directions, and with patience she didn't know she still had, managed to calm him down. The tourist smiled in relief, thanked her, and left into the desert night. For Jenna, that was the end of it. Just another good deed that wouldn't pay rent. But it wasn't the end, because at the booth just behind them, a man had been watching. His name was Gregory Finch, though no one at Charlie's Diner knew it yet. His suits cost more than Jenna made in a month. His wealth stretched across 3 states, but his eyes, sharp and restless, carried the look of someone haunted. He hadn't touched his food. He hadn't looked at the menu. He had only watched Jenna. Watched the way she steadied the tourist with a patience money couldn't buy. And for reasons even he couldn't admit to himself, that small act pierced through his armor of silence and secrets. When the tourist left, Gregory leaned forward. He didn't smile. He didn't clear his throat. He simply waited, letting the silence stretch until Jenna finally noticed him. She walked over, pen in hand, ready to take his order. But instead of speaking, Gregory reached into his jacket. Slowly, deliberately, he set something on the edge of the table. A brass key, heavy, ornate, out of place against the chipped formica. Jenna blinked. "What's this?" Gregory's voice was quiet, but there was something trembling beneath it. "Take it. You'll understand when you're ready." Jenna laughed nervously, shaking her head. If this is some kind of joke. But his eyes didn't flinch. They burned with something between fear and hope. "No joke. That key doesn't open a door here. It opens the life you've been denied." Her hand hesitated, hovering above the key. And then, almost against her will, she picked it up. It was cold in her palm, humming with a weight she couldn't explain. And just like that, the night stopped being ordinary. Morning light crept through the blinds of Jenna Riley's apartment, cutting across a kitchen counter stacked with bills. She rubbed her eyes, staring at the envelopes as if sheer willpower could erase the red stamps that screamed past due. Rent, utilities, a lingering medical debt she hadn't been able to touch in months. It wasn't the life she had imagined at 17, when she still carried notebooks filled with anatomy sketches and acceptance letters from 2 different nursing programs. Back then, the plan was simple. Study hard, earn her degree, and finally step into a future that didn't smell like grease traps and disinfectant. But life had other plans. When her mother's lungs gave out, the bills came faster than the paychecks. Jenna had worked nights, then double shifts, then whatever she could find. Nursing school became an impossible dream buried under paperwork for bags, and the sound of her mother coughing through the walls of their small apartment. And when her mother finally passed, Jenna was left with grief and a mountain of debt in her name. So instead of hospital halls, she got Charlie's Diner, a sun-bleached box on the highway that hadn't been updated since 1979. Every morning, the neon sign flickered to life with a hum that rattled her teeth. Every morning, Jenna slipped into a uniform that smelled faintly of bleach, tied her hair back, and prepared to serve truckers, lost tourists, and locals who knew exactly how little they had to tip. "Order up." Charlie's voice always boomed from the kitchen window, even when the place was nearly empty. He wasn't cruel, just practical, the kind of man who believed dreams were luxuries meant for people with trust funds. "Riley, grab those pancakes before they go cold." Jenna obeyed, balancing plates with practiced ease. She smiled at customers who didn't bother to look her in the eye. She refilled coffee cups before they were empty. She laughed at bad jokes, swallowed her own exhaustion, and moved as though invisible wires kept her upright. But inside she ached. Every plate she carried felt like another reminder of what she'd lost. Every broken jukebox song reminded her of the nights she used to sit with her mom, imagining what life might be like beyond the desert. And every shift blurred into the next until time itself felt stuck in that diner, circling like the ceiling fan that wobbled above the counter. Still, Jenna endured. She told herself there was honor in working hard, in paying what debt she could, in keeping her head down. And maybe there was no denying the weight. The grinding truth that her 20s were slipping through her fingers while she waited tables for people who would never remember her name. And that was why the night before, the lost tourist, the Spanish words she barely remembered, the brass key pressed into her hand, lingered like a fever dream. Because for the first time in years, someone had noticed her. Not for the coffee she poured, not for the smile she forced, but for something real. She hadn't told anyone, not Charlie, not the other waitresses. She hadn't even dared to call her best friend from high school, the one who used to remind her she was destined for more. The key sat in her apron pocket all night, burning against her hip until she finally tucked it beneath her pillow, as though it might whisper secrets while she slept. And now, as Jenna tied her hair back and prepared for another day of burnt coffee and chipped plates, the question wouldn't leave her mind. Why would a stranger with eyes full of secrets hand her something that felt like destiny disguised as metal? The bell above the diner door gave a half-hearted jingle, and Jenna glanced up from wiping down the counter. A man stumbled inside, clutching a folded map, so frayed it looked older than the jukebox in the corner. His face was flushed, sweat dripping down his temples, and his eyes darted around like a cornered animal. Perdón, he muttered, almost to himself. His Spanish rolled out fast, tangled with panic. He pointed to the map, then out the door, then back to the map again. Jenna froze. Spanish wasn't her language, not really. Her grandmother had spoken it, taught her fragments in childhood. But Jenna had let the words slip through her fingers like sand. Now faced with this desperate man, her brain scrambled to remember. She set the rag aside and stepped closer, offering a small, cautious smile. Despacio, she whispered. Slowly. The man blinked at her, relief flickering in his eyes. He tried again, speaking slower this time. He was lost. His car had broken down outside of town, and he was searching for a relative who lived somewhere near Santa Fe. The street names tangled on his tongue foreign to Jenna, but she leaned in, nodding, miming directions with her hands. Derecha después izquierda, she stammered, clumsy but sincere. Right, then left. She pointed out the window, drawing paths in the air, repeating herself until his shoulders finally lowered and his breathing steadied. When his lips curved into a grateful smile, Jenna felt a warmth she hadn't known she was capable of anymore. It wasn't much, just directions, just a few broken words, but for him, it meant safety. He reached for her hand suddenly, squeezing it with both of his, gratitude written across his face even without words. Gracias, señorita, he said, his voice thick. Jenna returned the smile, embarrassed by her own clumsy Spanish, yet strangely proud that she'd managed to help. She watched as he folded his map, pressed it to his chest, and walked back into the night. To her, it was a moment of kindness, a small thing, a reminder that maybe she wasn't as invisible as she thought. But to someone else in that diner, it was everything. At the far end of the diner, in a cracked leather booth that sagged from decades of use, Gregory Finch had watched the entire exchange. He had walked into Charlie's that night with the quiet intention of disappearing. For a man of his wealth, anonymity was rare. But here in this forgotten roadside stop, he was just another weary traveler with shadows under his eyes. Or so he hoped. His untouched coffee steamed faintly in front of him. He hadn't so much as lifted the cup. His gaze had been fixed entirely on the young waitress. On the way she calmed the frantic tourist with patience. On the way she fumbled for words yet never let go of kindness. It disarmed him. Gregory Finch wasn't a man easily moved. His world was numbers, inheritances, and contracts written in ink darker than blood. His life had been built on foundations of power and fear. And for decades, he had convinced himself compassion was a weakness. But something about her, this Jenna Riley with tired eyes and worn shoes, cut through. He saw more than her kindness. He saw the exhaustion in her movements, the way she carried plates as though they were burdens, not meals. He saw how no one in the diner looked at her twice, how invisibility had become her second skin. And in that invisibility, Gregory saw himself, because he too had lived with secrets that gnawed him. His jaw tightened as memories pressed in, family portraits with missing faces, legal documents rewritten to erase names, promises broken long before Jenna had even been born. He had told himself for years that it wasn't his responsibility, that silence was survival. But seeing Jenna steady that stranger with nothing but willpower made the silence feel like poison. The key in his pocket felt heavier than ever, brass cold, ornate. He had carried it for weeks, debating, doubting. But watching Jenna was like watching fate tap its finger against the glass. His thoughts circled in whispers he couldn't silence. She's the one. She deserves to know. She deserves to see what was stolen. Still, hesitation coiled in his chest. Handing over the key would mean exposing truths that had been buried for decades, truths that would burn reputations, divide bloodlines, and possibly destroy the fragile balance he had maintained. But then Jenna turned, laughing softly as the tourist squeezed her hand in thanks, and Gregory felt something shift. A choice hardened inside him. He didn't know her story, not all of it. He didn't need to. What he had seen in the last 5 minutes told him enough. She had courage. She had heart, and she had nothing left to lose. And maybe, just maybe, that was what made her the only person who could carry the weight of the mansion key. He leaned back in the booth, fingers brushing the brass shape in his pocket, and waited. Because the moment the tourist left, Gregory Finch knew he would change Jenna Riley's life forever. The clock above the counter ticked past midnight with a sluggish persistence, its second hand stuttering on every turn. The diner had emptied out hours ago, leaving behind the familiar ghosts, the scent of fried onions that clung to the curtains, the sticky residue on the tables no cloth could quite erase, the faint hum of the neon open sign flickering in the window like a tired heartbeat. Jenna Riley scrubbed the counter with more force than necessary, her arm aching from the weight of another double shift. Charlie had already left, muttering something about tomorrow's deliveries, leaving her to finish closing alone. She didn't mind. Solitude had become its own kind of comfort, quieter than the chatter of customers, more honest than the empty promises of people who had long since stopped checking on her. Her mind replayed the evening like a scratch record. The tourist's wide eyes, his panic, his gratitude. She'd felt it again, the pulse of belonging, however small. Like maybe she still had something to give. It was rare, that feeling. Most days, Jen existed in survival mode. Wake, work, repeat. But tonight was different. She caught a reflection in the window, faint under the neon glare. A young woman, 27, but already worn at the edges. Her brown hair, pulled tight in a bun, revealed dark circles that no concealer could hide. Her uniform smelled like grease and coffee. Her sneakers were splitting at the seams. Nursing school had once been her dream. Her mother's too, but debt had seen to that. Then came her mother's illness, the endless hospital bills, the way dreams bent and broke until only work remained. She sighed, pressing her forehead briefly to the cool glass of the window. "This is it, huh?" she whispered, the words vanishing into the hum of the fluorescent lights. Outside, the streets of Santa Fe lay empty, washed in silver by a weak moon. The adobe buildings looked soft at night, their edges blurred like watercolor. Somewhere in the distance, a train's horn cut through the silence, low and mournful. Jenna locked the register, wiped her hands on her apron, and finally untied it. The string left a red mark around her waist, a reminder of hours she couldn't get back. She slung her jacket over her arm and stepped outside, the dry desert air instantly cooler than the stifling diner. Her walk home was short, 10 blocks past shuttered storefronts and old stucco houses, with their porches sagging under the weight of years. She always kept her head down, one ear tuned to the sound of footsteps that might not belong to her. Tonight, though, she found herself glancing up at the stars, bright, unblinking, a luxury city people never saw. Her grandmother used to say they were candles for the forgotten, lighting the path for those who felt invisible. Maybe that was her, invisible. And yet, tonight, it hadn't felt entirely true. Something had shifted. The way the tourist clung to her words, how his relief poured out like water onto dry ground. The way she felt seen for once, not as a waitress delivering plates, but as someone capable of changing a moment, maybe even a life. But what she didn't notice, not yet, was that someone else had been watching. Someone who didn't see a worn-out waitress or a girl buried under debt. Someone who saw a key as Jenna turned onto her street. The thought lingered like an itch she couldn't scratch. Maybe the ordinary wasn't all she had left. Maybe, just maybe, the extraordinary had already found her. She pulled her jacket tighter, unaware that the choice of a stranger at the next table was about to upend everything she thought she knew about her past and her future. The bell above the diner door chimed again, faint and hollow against the silence. Jenna stiffened. She had just finished wiping the last table, the chairs already stacked on top, the floor swept into tired little piles of dust. No one ever came in this late. She turned, expecting maybe a trucker desperate for coffee. Maybe Charlie back for his forgotten ledger. Instead, it was him, Gregory Finch, the man who had lingered earlier, half hidden in the booth like he was trying not to be seen. Now he walked with a slow, deliberate step, the kind that carried weight, without a word. His tailored jacket looked out of place under the cheap fluorescent lights. His face, sharp and weathered, was unreadable. Jenna forced a polite smile, though her stomach twisted. "Sorry, sir, we're closed." Gregory stopped in the middle of the room, scanning the empty diner as though confirming they were alone. Then his eyes found hers, steady and unflinching. "I know," he said, his voice low, threaded with something she couldn't place. "That's why I came back." The air shifted, tense. Jenna glanced at the clock, then at the door, calculating whether she should insist he leave or just wait him out. Something in his presence made her uneasy. Not dangerous exactly, but expectant, like she was about to be tested without knowing the subject. "Can I help you?" she asked, clutching the rag in her hands a little too tightly. Gregory stepped closer, but not too close. He seemed careful, measured, as though every inch mattered. He stopped at the counter, resting his hands on the edge, fingers pale against the cheap laminate. "I saw what you did tonight," he said. His eyes flickered with intensity. "With the tourist." Jenna blinked, confused. "That? I just gave him directions." It was nothing. His lips pressed into a thin line. It wasn't nothing. You gave him calm when he had none. You reached into his panic and steadied him. "That's not nothing, Miss Riley." The use of her name startled her. She hadn't introduced herself. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unsettled. "How do you?" Gregory didn't answer right away. He slid his hand into his jacket pocket, and Jenna tensed instinctively. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out something small and brass. A key. He set it on the counter between them. The metal caught the light, ornate and heavy, nothing like the dull house keys Jenna knew. Its bow was engraved with faint markings, almost like initials worn down by time. The sound of it hitting the counter was louder than it should have been, like a gavel in a silent courtroom. Jenna stared. "What is this?" Gregory's voice lowered, the weight of a confession in every syllable. "It's yours. Take it." Her throat went dry. She let out a nervous laugh, shaking her head. "Look, if this is some kind of joke." "It's no joke." His tone cut clean, final. He leaned in slightly, his gaze never breaking from hers. "That key will open a door that belongs to you, Jenna. A door you've been denied your whole life." Her hand trembled as she touched the key. It was cold, colder than it should have been. Something inside her whispered to leave it there, to walk away. But another voice, buried deeper, told her this moment mattered. Gregory straightened, his expression unreadable, almost haunted. "You'll understand when you're ready." And with that he turned and walked out, the bell above the door giving its lonely jingle once more. Jenna stood frozen in the empty diner, the brass key in her hand, her world tilting into something she couldn't yet name. The key gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light, far too regal to belong in a chip diner. Jenna's rag slipped from her hands and landed on the counter with a soft thud. She stared at the object like it might burn her if she touched it again. "What is this?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Gregory Finch didn't flinch. His eyes locked on hers, steady, unyielding. "It's an answer. Maybe even a beginning." Her laugh came too quickly, brittle with nerves. "That's vague and creepy." You just slide a key at me? Like we're in some spy movie? You think this is a game? His words were sharp, cutting through the empty diner's quiet. I wouldn't be here if it was. Jenna crossed her arms, trying to keep her voice from trembling. Sir, I don't know what you want from me. I gave it tourist directions. That doesn't mean I want whatever this is. She gestured to the key. Gregory leaned forward slightly, lowering his tone. That wasn't what I saw. You didn't just point him to the road. You steadied him. You reminded him he wasn't alone. Do you know how rare that is? Jenna blinked, bewildered. You don't even know me. What? Some guy who spies on waitresses? Do you have any idea how this looks? A shadow passed over his face, tightening the lines around his eyes. I know exactly how it looks, and I know exactly who you are. The words landed like a stone in her stomach. Excuse me. Gregory exhaled slowly, as though steadying himself. You're Jenna Riley, 27. Worked here since you were 19. Your mother, Patricia, got sick 3 years ago. You've carried more weight than most people twice your age, and still, tonight, you had the heart to stop and help a man who couldn't even ask you in English. That's who you are. Her pulse spiked. How do you know all that? Because I've been searching, he said simply, like the truth required no justification. Because I've been waiting for the right moment to find you. Jenna stepped back, her chair scraping the floor. This is insane. You need to leave. Gregory didn't move. He only tapped the brass key with one finger. This belongs to you more than it ever belonged to me. She shook her head, feeling the ground tilt beneath her. You don't just walk up to strangers and hand them, what, a mansion key? That's not normal. No, he admitted. But nothing about your life is normal. Not anymore. Jenna pressed her hands to the counter, her knuckles white. You can't just dump this on me. Why me? Why now? His gaze softened, but the urgency in it never dimmed. Because you deserve more than greasy shifts and empty tips. Because this, he tapped the key again, isn't about money. It's about truth. It's about a history you were never told. She stared at the ornate grooves, her chest tight. Part of her wanted to laugh, to throw it back at him and walk away. Another part, the part that had lain awake night after night wondering if her life would ever change, ached to believe him. Gregory's voice dropped to a whisper. Take it, please. You'll understand when you're ready, but don't wait too long. Jenna finally reached out, her fingertips brushing the cool brass. It felt heavier than it should have, humming faintly against her skin as though it carried its own pulse. Her breath caught. I don't even know what door this opens. You will, Gregory said, straightening. His face was unreadable now, but something in his eyes, fear, hope, maybe both, lingered. And when you do, you'll realize you've had the strength for it all along. Before she could argue, he turned and walked away. The bell above the door chimed. Then silence swallowed the diner again. Jenna stood alone, the key pressed against her palm, her heart hammering. She whispered into the emptiness. What am I supposed to do with this? The key gave no answer. But deep down, Jenna knew. Nothing in her life would ever be the same. The brass key felt heavier in Jenna's apron pocket than her entire tray of dishes. She wanted to throw it away, to pretend none of this had happened. But Gregory Finch's voice clung to her like smoke. You'll understand when you're ready. She replayed the words as she stacked chairs and wiped down counters. Empty ketchup bottles rattled faintly, the diner unusually quiet. When she finally turned back, Gregory hadn't left after all. He lingered near the door, half-shadowed, watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Jenna swallowed hard. Why me? Why not anyone else? Gregory stepped closer, his shoes clicking softly on the linoleum. His voice dropped low, urgent. Because anyone else would waste it. Sell it. Destroy it. You'll fight for it, even when you don't want to. Her brow furrowed. Fight for what? He hesitated, his jaw tightening as if the truth itself were a dangerous weapon. For a story that was stolen before you were old enough to know it existed. For a legacy buried under lies. Jenna's arms crossed against her chest. You're not making sense. You sound like a riddle. Gregory's eyes flicked to the window, scanning the street as though someone might be listening. I can't give you everything now. If I do, you run. Or worse, someone will make sure you never get the chance to use that key. Her stomach twisted. Someone? Who? The faintest tremor crept into his tone. People who smile to your face while tightening the noose behind your back. People who profit from you staying small, staying silent. Jenna gripped the rag in her hand, her pulse racing. What does that even mean? Who are you talking about? Gregory leaned in just enough that she caught the faint scent of tobacco and cedar. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers, Jenna. Sometimes it's the ones closest to you. Her breath hitched. Why should I trust you then? You could be one of them. His expression hardened, but his voice softened, almost pleading. Because I risked everything to put that key in your hand. If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't have warned you. For a long beat, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the back. Gregory finally straightened, pulling his coat tighter. Keep it safe. When the time comes, you'll have to choose who you believe. And when you make that choice, don't hesitate. And then, without another word, he stepped out into the Santa Fe night, leaving Jenna with nothing but the echo of his warning, and a storm building in her chest. The next morning, Jenna dragged herself into Charlie's diner, the key tucked deep in her purse. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, every dream looping Gregory's words. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sarah Morales noticed immediately. Perched behind the counter in her usual perch, Sarah was already sipping on a lukewarm cup of diner coffee. Her curly black hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her sharp eyes didn't miss a thing. You look like death warmed over, Sarah said, setting down her mug. Long night? Jenna hesitated, then leaned against the counter, lowering her voice. Something happened, and I don't know what to do with it. Sarah arched a brow. If this is about that guy who stiffed you on a tip again, I'll track him down myself. Jenna shook her head. Not that. This is bigger. She pulled the brass key from her purse and slid it across the counter, just as Gregory had done. It glimmered under the diner lights, ornate and out of place. Sarah frowned, picking it up. What is this? A prop? It looks like it belongs in a museum. Gregory Finch gave it to me last night. Sarah froze, her tone shifting instantly. Wait, the Gregory Finch? As in Santa Fe's own real-life Gatsby? The guy who owns half the hills outside town. That's him, Jenna muttered. Sarah leaned in, her voice dropping. Okay, and why is he giving you keys to mansions? Jenna exhaled shakily. I don't know. He said I'd understand when I'm ready. He talked about secrets, betrayal, some kind of legacy. It made no sense. Sarah tapped the key against the counter. Her lips pursed. Jenna, this sounds like a scam. Or, worse, like something criminal. Rich men don't just hand out mansion keys unless they want something. That's what I thought, Jenna whispered. But he looked so serious, almost scared. Sarah studied her friend's face, then sighed. Look, you've been through enough. Your mom, this diner, all of it. You don't need some billionaire dragging you into a soap opera. Jenna's gaze dropped to the key. But what if he's right? What if I meant to know something? Sarah shook her head firmly. Or what if it's a setup? Promise me you won't run off to that mansion alone. Jenna bit her lip, uncertainty clawing at her. I promise. But as she slid the key back into her purse, she knew the truth. She wasn't sure she could keep that promise. The key lay on Jenna's nightstand like an accusation. She had tossed it there hours ago, trying to ignore it while folding laundry, reheating leftovers, even flipping through an old nursing textbook she couldn't bring herself to sell. But every time she glanced over, the brass gleam seemed to whisper her name. She finally snatched it up, holding it tight in her fist. This is ridiculous, she muttered aloud, pacing across the small, cramped apartment. I don't need this. I don't need him. Her thumb traced the ornate bow of the key, the faint engraving she hadn't noticed before. A series of numbers. An address, maybe. Canyon Road. Her pulse quickened. Throw it away, she told herself. Forget it. She even grabbed her purse and stuffed the key inside, ready to march it out to the dumpster behind her building. She stood at the door, one hand on the knob, but her body refused to move forward. Instead, a wave of heat climbed up her neck, a strange mix of dread and curiosity. What if Sarah was right? What if this was a trap? But then another voice rose inside her, quieter but sharper. And what if he wasn't lying? What if everything you've been denied, everything you've worked for, waits on the other side of that door? She froze in the hallway, caught between two lives. the safe one she already hated, and the dangerous one she couldn't stop imagining. Finally, Jenna exhaled, shaky but decisive. Fine. One look, and then I'll decide. She slid the key back into her pocket, her hand trembling as though she'd just signed a contract. The next morning, she dressed quickly, pulling on her faded jeans and diner sneakers, trying to look ordinary even though her heart wasn't. The world outside felt sharper, heavier, as if the universe itself knew she was about to cross a line. The bus ride into town blurred past. At every stop, she fought the urge to turn back, to pretend she hadn't seen Gregory Finch's eyes or heard his warning. But when her phone buzzed with another overdue bill notification, she gripped the key tighter. No, she couldn't go back. Not yet. She got off near Canyon Road and stood at the edge of a long tree-lined drive. It wound upward toward something massive, something hidden beyond the curve. Her chest tightened. Jenna swallowed hard. Okay, she whispered to herself. Just one look. What she didn't know was that a black sedan sat parked across the street, engine idling. Behind the tinted glass, Gregory Finch leaned forward, eyes locked on her small figure framed against the vast estate road. He hadn't been wrong about her. She hadn't thrown it away. She had chosen. And now the game had truly begun. The drive up Canyon Road twisted like a ribbon laid across the earth, climbing higher into the hills. Jenna's sneakers crunched over gravel as she walked, every step echoing with the uneasy rhythm of a trespasser. The autumn air was thin and sharp, scented faintly with cedar and smoke drifting down from distant chimneys. But the estate at the end of the road was nothing like the warm homes she passed along the way. The gates loomed first, iron ornate, blackened with age. Their bars curled into elaborate shapes, roses, crosses, crescents. Locked, yet not insurmountable. She hesitated, then slid the brass key into the slot that seemed carved exactly for it. A heavy click answered her. The gate creaked open like an old throat clearing. She stepped through. The mansion revealed itself slowly, as if the property wanted to keep its secrets until the very last possible second. First came the grounds, sprawling untended, half-wild gardens where thorny roses had strangled their own trellises. Stone statues stood cracked and lichen-covered, their faces weathered into grim masks. A dried fountain squatted in the center, its marble bowl filled with dead leaves instead of water. And then, at the end of the path, the house itself. It rose 3 stories, a mix of Spanish Revival and Gothic, with arched windows, pale stucco walls streaked by years of rain, and a roof line bristling with chimneys. Wooden shutters hung crookedly, one flapping loosely in the breeze like a broken arm. Even from the driveway, Jenna felt its presence. Heaven, watching. Her throat tightened. This isn't real. Places like this don't exist outside of movies. She climbed the front steps. Each one moaned under her weight. At the top, the front door waited. A great oak slab, scarred with scratches deep enough to suggest someone, once, had tried to claw their way out. Her hand shook as she brought the key from her pocket. She hesitated, listening. The wind rattled branches. Somewhere far off, a raven cawed, sharp and accusing. The key slid in smoothly, too smoothly, as if it had been used only yesterday. The lock turned with a satisfying finality. The door opened. The air inside was stale, tinged with dust and something faintly metallic, like old coins. The foyer stretched wide, floored in black and white tiles that gleamed faintly even under a film of neglect. A chandelier hung overhead, its crystals dulled, but still catching threads of light through cracked stained glass windows. Her eyes caught on portraits lining the walls. Men and women in formal dress, painted in dark oils, their faces pale, their gazes stern. One woman looked unsettlingly like her grandmother. Jenna stepped closer, her breath catching. No, can't be. She tore her eyes away. A floorboard creaked above her. She froze, heart slamming in her chest. The house wasn't empty. Or maybe it was just settling, old with sighing against the cold. She tried to convince herself of that, but her hands were clammy, her pulse hammering too loud in her ears. Still, she stepped further inside. The key in her pocket hummed like a heartbeat, daring her to keep going. The mansion breathed differently inside. Every corner seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to step too far, touch too much. Jenna closed the heavy front door behind her, and the sound echoed like the lid of a coffin shutting. She moved slowly, her sneakers squeaking against the tiled floor. Dust floated in lazy spirals through thin shafts of light that pierced the stained glass windows. Each ray cast strange colors, ruby, emerald, sapphire, splashed across walls lined with portraits. Jenna hesitated in front of the largest painting, a man in a tailored suit, his hand resting stiffly on the shoulder of a boy. The man's eyes seemed cold, watchful. The boy, though, had eyes wide with fear. The brass plate beneath read Arthur Finch, 1949. She swallowed hard, remembering Gregory Finch's trembling voice at the diner. Was this his father? Grandfather? Room by room, the house whispered its story in fragments. An abandoned parlor with couches covered in dust cloths. A dining room with a table so long it could seat 20. Silverware still laid out, as if dinner had been interrupted decades ago. The smell of aged wood and mildew clung to everything. The deeper she wandered, the heavier it felt, like history itself was pressing down on her, insisting she didn't belong. But one room stopped her cold. It was a study, small, lined with books that sagged against shelves, their leather spines cracked. A globe sat in the corner, its oceans faded to pale green, and behind the desk, another portrait. This one made her chest ache. The woman was young, dark hair pinned back neatly, wearing a string of pearls. Her eyes were softer, almost kind, but there was sadness too, as if she carried a burden too heavy for her shoulders. Jenna stepped closer, whispering without meaning to, "She looks like, Mom." The resemblance wasn't exact, but close enough to raise goosebumps across her skin. She backed away, heart pounding, and caught her reflection in the glass frame. For a split second, it looked like the painted woman's eyes blinked behind her. She gasped, turned, but of course, the room was empty. Still, she couldn't shake the eerie sense that the portraits weren't just images. They were witnesses, watching, waiting, and she hadn't yet earned their silence. The study's desk pulled at her attention, its mahogany surface covered in a fine coat of dust. Jenna ran her fingers across it, leaving tracks like fresh footprints in snow. One drawer opened easily, revealing nothing but brittle papers. The next stuck halfway, squealing against swollen wood, before sliding open to reveal a leather-bound notebook. Its pages had faded ink, spidery handwriting in a language she couldn't immediately place. Maybe Latin, maybe Spanish. She set it aside carefully, but the third drawer refused to budge. It rattled against some inner lock. Jenna tugged harder. Nothing. Her frustration spiked. Why am I even doing this? She should have been at the diner, refilling mugs, pretending life was simple. Instead, she was breaking into a dead family's secrets. But her hands didn't stop. She rummaged around the desktop until she found a tarnished brass key tucked beneath a blotter. It fit the drawer perfectly. The lock clicked. Inside was a stack of envelopes, yellowed and brittle, bound together with string. She slid one free and opened it carefully. "To my brother Julian," it began. Her heart thudded as she read on. The letter spoke of betrayal, of land and titles stolen through legal trickery. It hinted at a sibling disowned, at children stripped of their name. Jenna's throat went dry. She flipped through more letters, each one echoing the same theme. Betrayal, inheritance stolen, siblings at war. Words like estranged, illegitimate, and claim denied leapt out like knives. She sat back, trembling. This wasn't just family drama. It was a war, and someone had buried it beneath years of silence. Her fingers brushed the last envelope, sealed in crimson wax. She didn't open it. Not yet. The weight of the letters already pressed against her chest like lead. One thing was clear. Gregory hadn't given her a mansion key for charity. He had handed her an invitation into a legacy poisoned by betrayal. The portraits on the wall loomed larger now, as though waiting for her to admit the truth. She whispered to herself, voice breaking, What if this is about me?" The silence answered her, heavy and undeniable. The deeper Jenna dug into the study, the more the house seemed to resist her. Drawers stuck, hinges groaned, shadows stretched longer than they should. Still, she pressed forward, her eyes catching on a peculiar rug beneath the desk. She bent down, tugging at the edge. The rug peeled back, revealing a square of metal set into the floor, a small safe, its edges dulled by rust. Her pulse leapt. The brass key Gregory had given her still sat warm in her pocket. She hesitated, then slid it into the lock. A click echoed through the room, sharp and final. The door creaked open. Inside lay a neat stack of folders bound with twine. Jenna pulled one free and brushed off dust. The papers inside weren't letters this time. They were legal documents, stamped and notarized. Last will and testament of Arthur Finch, 1951. Her breath caught. She skimmed the pages, trying to decipher the old-fashioned script. Names leapt out: Gregory Finch, Julian Finch. Clauses about entitlements, transfer of property, and revocation of inheritance. The words painted a partial picture. Arthur Finch had stripped one sibling of his share, altering the family's fortune forever. The ink bled bitterness through every paragraph. Jenna sat frozen, the folder trembling in her hands. This wasn't just history. It was evidence, proof of a betrayal that still echoed through generations. She shoved the papers back into the safe, locking it again with shaking hands. Her throat was dry, her heart hammering. Gregory's warning rang in her head. You'll understand when you're ready. Ready for what? The house creaked above her, like footsteps moving where no one should be. Jenna barely had time to stand when the study door groaned open. A tall figure filled the frame, sharp-featured. His suit immaculate despite the dust of the house. His eyes, pale and piercing, locked on the desk, then narrowed at her. What do you think you're doing? Jenna's stomach dropped. She didn't know him, but something about the way he carried himself, the same sharpness from the portraits, told her who he must be. Arthur Finch. No, not the Arthur. That man had died decades ago. This was his blood, his heir. I was just... Her voice cracked, fumbling for an excuse. The man stepped closer, his polished shoes silent on the wooden floor. His expression hardened into something cold, practiced. You shouldn't be here, he said flatly. And whatever that old man told you, forget it. Jenna swallowed, heat rising to her cheeks. Gregory gave me the key. At the name, his jaw tightened. His voice dropped, steel beneath every word. That key never should have found you. The room seemed to darken around him, the air growing colder. Jenna's fingers curled around the edge of the desk for balance. Leave now, he said, his eyes burning with unspoken threat. Before you end up carrying a weight you don't understand. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jenna's mind raced with questions, but none found her lips. She realized one thing, though, with absolute clarity. She wasn't just trespassing in a mansion. She was trespassing in a war, and Arthur Finch had just declared himself her enemy. Later that night, Jenna lay on her narrow apartment bed, the brass key resting beside her like a promise or a warning. The city lights of Santa Fe flickered weakly through the blinds, but they couldn't compete with the vision forming in her mind. She imagined the mansion as it could be in her hands, polished floors gleaming under sunlight, rooms restored to warmth instead of cold silence, portraits dusted, but alive with stories of family reclaimed rather than lost. In her daydream, she wandered the long halls with purpose, not fear. She ran her fingers along the banisters, feeling the weight of history settle comfortably instead of pressing her down. She was no longer Jenna Riley, waitress and burdened daughter. She was the heiress of a truth stolen, stepping into a life that had been waiting decades for her arrival. She saw herself laughing in the dining hall, hosting friends and family. She pictured Sarah at her side, coffee mugs in hand, both of them shaking their heads at the absurdity of it all. No more double shifts, no more bills piling like immovable bricks. A freedom she had almost forgotten existed. Jenna's fingers brushed the key. It hummed faintly, almost like it was sharing her excitement. She closed her eyes, imagining what she might find in those locked drawers and dusty safes. Letters proving she had been denied her rightful name. Portraits finally acknowledging her place among them. Justice, recognition, redemption. The fantasy sharpened, filling her lungs with hope she hadn't breathed in years. She could almost feel the estate's cold stone warmth under her fingertips, smell the polished wood and faint cedar, hear the wind whispering through the wild gardens, now tamed. But beneath the thrill, a thread of fear lingered, quiet and insistent. Dreams like these didn't come without cost, and she knew it. The mansion's secrets weren't hers to take lightly. Someone or something was guarding them, and Arthur Finch's words echoed still. That key never should have found you. Jenna exhaled slowly, hugging the thin blanket closer. The fantasy flickered, but it didn't die. It lingered in the corners of her mind, a fragile flame she wasn't ready to let go of. For the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of possibility, the intoxicating pull of a life she could almost touch. And deep down, she knew she wouldn't stop until she did. The morning sun was pale and hesitant when Jenna returned to the mansion. Mist clung to the edges of the estate, curling around statues and thorny gardens like a ghostly welcome. Her sneakers crunched over gravel, heart hammering with anticipation, the brass key warm in her pocket. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and dust, familiar and oppressive. She moved through the foyer quickly, her eyes scanning for the study. The house was quiet now, too quiet. Every creak of a floorboard echoed like a warning. Jenna reached the study and hesitated at the desk. Her gaze flicked to the back wall, where the portraits loomed silently. One, the young woman with the pearls, seemed almost to beckon her forward. Something nagged at the base of her memory, a fragment of a conversation her mother had whispered long ago. You're tied to them, Jenna, more than you realize. She began running her hands along the wall, looking for anything unusual. Her fingers paused at the baseboard, where a seam barely visible broke the monotony of the dark wood paneling. Heart racing, she pressed against it. The panel shuddered and shifted. A narrow slot appeared, just wide enough for her hands to squeeze inside. She pulled it open and froze. Inside was a stash of envelopes and folders, yellowed with age. The topmost envelope bore her mother's name, Evelyn Riley Finch. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it. The letters spilled out onto the desk like fragments of a stolen past. Handwritten notes, legal documents, birth records, all confirming what her mother had tried to tell her in fragments and whispers. Evelyn Riley had been part of the Finch family, removed from the inheritance through deception, betrayal, and a web of lies that had lasted decades. Jenna's breath caught. Every injustice she had endured, bills she couldn't pay, nights she had cried herself to sleep, the dreams she'd had to abandon, suddenly fit into a larger, crueler puzzle. One folder contained more than papers. Inside were photographs. Her mother as a young woman, standing beside Arthur Finch and another man she didn't recognize. Faces of men and women who had made her mother disappear from family memory. And there, tucked between them, a faded ribbon, an heirloom she vaguely remembered her mother wearing. Tears pricked Jenna's eyes. This wasn't just a mansion, a key, or a mystery anymore. This was her life, her lineage stolen from her. The anger she had felt at Gregory Finch's cryptic warnings transformed into a burning resolve. And yet a question lingered, gnawing at her. Why had Gregory chosen her now? Why hand her the key after decades of silence? The wall panel creaked ominously, reminding her she was not alone in this house. Someone had left these truths hidden. Yes. But had someone been watching her return? Jenna swallowed, setting her jaw. Whatever fear waited in the shadows, whatever dangers the Finch family still harbored, she was no longer a passive observer. She gathered the documents carefully, tucking them into her backpack. Each paper was a claim, a fragment of justice waiting to be reclaimed. Stepping back from the hidden panel, she felt the weight of possibility settle on her shoulders, and the stirring of a determination she hadn't known she possessed. This was her story now, and she was ready to fight for it. Jenna sank into the edge of the study chair, her fingers gripping the brass key like a lifeline she no longer trusted. The hidden panel, the letters, the photographs. They had all confirmed what her instincts had whispered for years. Her mother had been robbed of everything. Her name, her place in the family, the inheritance that should have been hers. And now, through some twisted twist of fate, Jenna had been handed the same burden. She ran a trembling hand over her face, trying to hold back tears. Every injustice she had endured, double shifts, unpaid bills, doors slammed in her face, now felt like a prelude, a rehearsal for the storm she had unwittingly stepped into. Her chest tightened as she realized the truth. Gregory Finch hadn't given her a gift. Not really. The mansion, the key, The hidden documents. They were a door to a war she hadn't asked to fight. A labyrinth of betrayal, family rivalries, and dangerous secrets that had festered for decades. "Why, me," she whispered aloud, her voice cracking. The room offered no comfort, only shadows that seemed to deepen around her. Every corner of the mansion reminded her of the stakes. Portraits of stoic ancestors watching silently. The dust-choked furniture. The silent hum of untold histories pressing down. This was a legacy built on deceit and greed, and she had just been thrown into the center of it. Her knees buckled, and she lowered her head into her hands. The key, cold and heavy in her pocket, had once promised possibility. Now it felt like a shackle. Gregory's words from that night at the diner echoed through her mind. "You'll understand when you're ready." Now she did understand. And it wasn't hope that filled her. It was fear, exhaustion, and a raw, unfiltered anger. The path forward was tangled, dangerous, and entirely unknown. Tears spilled freely as she whispered her fears into the empty room. The betrayal, the family torn apart, the inheritance stolen. The weight of a legacy thrust upon her shoulders. And yet, beneath the despair, a spark remained. It was fragile, tiny but insistent. She had been pushed to the brink, and yet she was still standing, still breathing, still capable of choosing. Jenna lifted her head slowly, wiping her cheeks. The emotional collapse had not broken her. It had clarified her purpose. She would not let her mother's name be erased. She would not let decades of deceit remain unchallenged. The key was no longer a promise of freedom. It was a challenge, a responsibility, and Jenna Riley, exhausted, angry, and determined, resolved that she would face it head-on. The mansion felt smaller that evening, suffused with the weight of impending conflict. Jenna stood in the grand foyer, clutching a stack of documents she had uncovered. The proof of her mother's Finch connection, her rightful claim. Her legacy finally visible in ink and paper. Footsteps echoed from a staircase. She turned to see Arthur Finch descending, his pale eyes fixed on her with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Behind him, other family members began to appear, some curious, some hostile, all carrying the air of entitlement. "You shouldn't be here," Arthur said, voice cold, each word deliberate. "That key, those documents, they're not yours. They were never meant to reach you." Jenna straightened, heart hammering. She held the papers tighter, letting the weight of truth give her strength. "They belong to me," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "My mother's name was stolen, her inheritance taken. I'm here to claim what's rightfully ours." A murmur ran through the room. Some family members shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. Others stepped forward, expressions hard. Julian Finch, a man in his 50s with a sharp jaw and thin lips, perpetually pursed, advanced. "This is absurd," he spat. "Your mother was removed from this family for a reason. These documents, they mean nothing." Jenna felt anger surge. "They mean everything. They prove what was done, what was hidden, what you've been pretending didn't exist for decades." Gregory, standing quietly at the edge of the room, watched her with that same intensity that had first shaken her at the diner. His lips pressed into a thin line unreadable, yet there was relief in his gaze. He had finally passed the torch, even if it had come with danger. Arthur's eyes narrowed. "You think a few papers change anything? This family's foundation isn't built on ink. It's built on control. You've been given a false sense of entitlement." Jenna swallowed. "Control? That's what stole my mother from me. That's what kept me invisible all these years. The truth isn't false, it's overdue." Tension coiled like a living thing in the air. Portraits on the walls seemed to lean closer, silent witnesses to the clash of bloodlines. Other relatives whispered, some choosing sides, others retreating, unsure whether justice or tradition mattered more. Then Jenna laid the letters and legal documents on the massive oak table. The room went silent. Even Arthur's breath seemed to catch. Every word, every signature, every date, proof undeniable. "This is real," she said, meeting their eyes. "Not a gift, not a coincidence. The truth has finally found its way to me." Arthur's face twisted, a mix of fury and disbelief. "Then you'll have to fight for it," he said quietly. Jenna didn't flinch. For the first time, She felt the weight of her mother's courage and her own resolve. The mansion was no longer a place of secrets. It was the battlefield where justice would finally be claimed. The room was heavy with silence. The family's murmurs had quieted, leaving only the weight of expectation and suspicion. Jenna clutched the documents, feeling the truth settle like stone in her hands. Gregory Finch stepped forward, his usual calm replaced by a rare vulnerability. The man whose fortune had always seemed untouchable now looked small, human. "I suppose it's time," he began, voice low but steady. "Time for the truth you deserve, and the truth I've been avoiding for far too long." Jenna turned, curiosity mixed with tension. The rest of the family watched, some incredulous, some wary. Gregory's hands, normally precise and controlled, fidgeted at his sides. "I gave you the key because I couldn't bear to see another generation erased. Your mother, Evelyn, she was robbed of her place in this family. I've lived with that knowledge for decades, and I thought perhaps you could reclaim what was lost." He paused, eyes glancing at Arthur, then back at Jenna. "I am guilty of silence, guilty of not protecting what was rightfully hers, rightfully yours. And I am guilty of fear of the consequences if the truth ever came out. But when I saw you helping that tourist, I realized something. You see the world differently than we do. You act without selfishness. I hoped you might be the one to finally set things right." Jenna's throat tightened. The anger she had carried at him, at the entire family, wavered. This wasn't an excuse, it was a confession. A hand extended toward the chaos of injustice that had defined the Finch legacy. "You gave me a war disguised as a gift," she whispered, voice trembling. "And yet it feels like hope too." Gregory's lips pressed together. "I didn't hand you a gift. I handed you responsibility, and I trusted that you of all people could bear it." The room seemed to exhale, the tension shifting ever so slightly. Allies and enemies alike registered the change. The man they had assumed untouchable was now undeniably human, flawed, and honest. Jenna studied him, the brass key heavy in her pocket, and finally understood. The inheritance, the family, the battle. It had all been waiting for someone courageous enough to confront it. And that someone was her. The grand hall of the Finch mansion was alive with quiet tension, each family member holding their breath as Jenna laid the documents, letters, and photographs carefully across the polished oak table. The air felt thick, almost electric, as if the house itself was waiting for the moment of reckoning. Arthur Finch's expression twisted, a mask of disbelief and fury contorting his otherwise stoic features. This is impossible," he spat, voice sharp and brittle. "These documents, they can't prove anything." Jenna met his gaze steadily. "They do. Every letter, every legal clause, every photograph confirms the truth. You stole my mother's inheritance. You erased her from this family, and you tried to erase me too." A murmur ran through the assembled relatives. Faces that had once looked indifferent now betrayed shock, disbelief, even anger. Allies who had hidden in shadows stepped forward, nodding subtly at her words. Arthur's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth, but the weight of evidence pressed down on him like iron. The birth records, notarized letters, and legal documents. Everything left no room for denial. Gregory Finch, standing quietly to the side, finally spoke. "Arthur, the truth has a way of finding those it belongs to. You cannot rewrite history no matter how long you've tried." Jenna's voice rose unwavering. "For decades, you built your life on lies and control. But today, everything changes. The Finch name cannot protect those who betray it." Arthur's composure crumbled. The arrogance that had once filled the room was replaced by desperation. "You think you can take it all? The name, the fortune, my reputation?" "Yes," Jenna said calmly, her hands resting on the documents. "I am reclaiming what was stolen. The rest, the lies, the betrayals, will be known for what they are." Gasps echoed as the family absorbed the revelation. Allies nodded at her courage, some shedding tears at long-hidden truths finally revealed. Arthur's face paled as whispers spread, every secret exposed, every manipulation laid bare. He stumbled back, speechless, his reputation shattered in an instant. The power he had wielded for decades crumbled before his own family, leaving him isolated, unmasked, and powerless. Jenna exhaled, a sense of triumph and relief washing over her. This was not about revenge, it was justice, finally delivered. She had faced the storm, confronted the lies, and emerged with her mother's name restored and her rightful place in the family acknowledged. Gregory stepped forward, a quiet pride in his eyes. "You've done what I could not," he said. "You've brought the truth to light." Jenna looked around the room, absorbing the faces of those who had fought, fled, or remained silent. The mansion, once a prison of secrets, now felt like a stage of resolution, each truth revealed like a ray of sunlight piercing the shadows. And as Arthur Finch retreated in defeat, Jenna realized the power of the key she had held all along, not just to open doors, but to unlock decades of hidden truth, reclaim stolen legacies, and restore honor where it had been denied. The mansion was quiet now, the echoes of conflict fading into the polished halls. Jenna stood in the grand foyer, the brass key cool and heavy in her hand, no longer a burden but a symbol of everything she had reclaimed. Portraits of ancestors seemed less intimidating, less judgmental. They had witnessed decades of secrecy, betrayal, and theft, and now they looked on as justice had finally been restored. Jenna's mother's name, Evelyn Riley Finch, was spoken aloud, acknowledged, and honored. She walked through the estate slowly, absorbing every detail. Dusty shelves were cleaned. Drawers left untouched for decades were now filled with the truth. The mansion, once a prison of deceit, had become a monument to revelation and honesty. Every creak of the floorboards, every ray of sunlight through the tall windows, seemed to celebrate the reclamation of a legacy long denied. Jenna felt the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. Her double shifts, her financial struggles, the years of invisibility, all of it paled against the clarity of truth and the dignity she now carried. She was no longer just a waitress from Santa Fe. She was the daughter, the heir, and the custodian of a family's hidden history. Gregory Finch observed from the edge of the room, a faint smile breaking his usually composed face. "You've done more than I ever could have imagined," he said. "You've restored what was taken, and in doing so reminded us all what it means to honor the truth." Jenna nodded, a calm certainty settling over her. The key in her pocket had opened more than a door. It had opened her life to possibility, recognition, and the self-respect she had been denied for so long. As she closed the front doors of the mansion behind her for the last time that evening, the narrator's voice cut softly through the quiet. "It's never too late to reclaim what was stolen. Sometimes the key we're handed isn't to a house, it's to our true selves." Jenna exhaled, letting the tension dissolve. The mansion stood behind her, a beacon of truth and justice, a reminder that courage and kindness can shift the course of a lifetime. She had stepped into her own story, and finally it was hers to write.